Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on the off Wednesday. I think we're going to be a small crew for this, which is just as well, because then I can flub my hinges in front of a small crowd instead of a big crowd.
You're not flubbing them. You're just teaching us what to do as we troubleshoot.
Girl, that's what I'm going to try. I did do a lot of prep work, but I didn't do a lot of hinges. I've got all the materials for what we're going to do today. But as usual, welcome everyone. Thanks for adjusting your schedule. Today, let me make sure I've got all of the news that's fit to post. I don't think I have to do any of my usual reminders about what the group is about, but I am going to let you know that there are, I think, now 2 spots left in my in-person Cradled in Style, Sophisticated Bezel Settings and Elegant Basket Settings, March 29th through 30th in Brookfield, Connecticut. It's a really beautiful little studio. So if you feel like traveling to southwestern Connecticut. It's down in the tip of the tail, down in Fairfield County, my old stomping grounds, and it's the school that I started teaching at when I first went to teach metalworking. So that's a 2-day class, and the first day is going to be some of the fancier bezels, the things that I don't teach in that we talked about in the Cogswell project, but we didn't actually do on screen because they're not actually in the book other than as a description of what you can do. So we're doing that on day one, and then we're doing making our own uh, clamp and doing basic basket settings for day 2. So again, that part you could grab from the Cogswell videos if you wanted to, but hands-on makes all the difference in the world if you're up for it. And then I come back on April 12th and 13th. I'm doing a 2-day clasp making class here in Portland at our brand new guild studio. So we've got a Creative Metal Arts Guild makerspace is how they're referring to it these days. And that is 2 days doing wire-based clasps and box clasps. And then my registration for other classes are up on the website. Those are my virtual ones, and there will be a fall in-person advanced clasps class out here at the CMAG studio. So those are what we got coming up. And if you happen to be in Boston the weekend of the 21st through the 23rd, come to the Paradise City Arts Festival. It's one of the most beautiful shows I've been in, and it's really well curated. It's easy to walk. It's in a really weird little venue, but it's a beautiful inside kind of show.
It's
Or
not,
come out
it's
to
not a
Portland.
big, it's not a big venue. I mean,
It's
it's a
not
big
big. It's
one.
got about 120 artists.
Oh, okay.
And then, yeah, I think it's 120 or 127, something like that, that fits in there usually. And then back here in Portland again, I have a show April 25th through 27th, and that is, I think we're now up to 10 different guilds with 350 plus artists from
Wow.
all around the Pacific Northwest. It's crazy good. And it's a really unusual show because it's set up with each guild has their own rows. And so if you don't want to go look at metalworking, you don't have to. You can skip that and go to the glassworking or whatever. So it's a really interesting layout, and it's nice and open. It doesn't have everybody closed into their booths. So you can see a lot of artwork, an overwhelming amount of artwork even. And those are my pitches. I will remind you that if you use the code that I am posting in chat as a reminder, if you use that code at Rio Grande, the Rio for Schools program will get you 6 months of what is essentially being a pro member rate. So a lot of your materials will be much cheaper. And did I forget anything? Think that's it on all the business stuff. Anybody have questions about any of those things? Okay.
When you
Who's
ask,
got things to oh, go ahead.
when you talk about the guild, is there
Yep.
one in Chicago?
I would be surprised if there isn't in the greater Chicago area. I don't know of one off the top of my head, but I know that Chicago has hosted Snag at least not
Yeah.
twice. And therefore, and they tend to go looking for places that already have a strong metals base.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can poke around and see what we can find, but I have a sneaking suspicion there's some kind of guild out there. Um,
Okay. I'm just
but
wondering
it's
because you
cool.
said there. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually a member of guilds in several parts of the country, in part because a lot of guilds give you better prices on their classes that kind of equals the cost of an annual membership. So any year that I'm taking a class somewhere, I'll just become a member. But also, a lot of them have really cool both virtual and in-person programming and opportunities for show events and so on. So I'm a member of Georgia's and Seattle's and, of course, Portland's. Um, and I'm contemplating, there's a really cool guild down in California that has a lot of great programming. There's two of them, and I can't remember which is the one that I'm thinking of joining. It's either MAGG or Metals Guild or something like that. I can't remember. But look around. Yeah. And if you can't find an actual full-on jewelers type metals guild, take a look at what blacksmithing guilds are out there and sculpture guilds, because some of those may actually have sort of an umbrella that covers a lot of the metal arts. So, yeah, good way to meet new people.
Yeah.
Any other questions before you guys show off what you have been working on? That's your clue. You guys show off your work now. And if you have anything they need to share or want to share or can begrudgingly share?
I don't know if I
Nothing?
showed you this before. I can get it.
Okay. While she's doing that, Renee or Helen, do you have anything you want to share?
No, sorry. It's too cold
That's okay.
still where I work, so I haven't.
Oh, you don't have heat in your studio. Bummer. Okay. What you got, Carmen? Let me spotlight you. Oh, so
So
you were in progress with these when you were, yeah, you showed them to us partially done and you were trying to figure out how to set them up.
they're not done. That's why I fell.
But they're way further than they were. That's cool. What's
Yeah.
that object?
This is a ball that
Yeah.
priming and then painting, actually my spouse does. And then I ended up doing this to it. And it's just gonna be
Wow.
like that. So it's that whole, I don't know, it's gonna look like that.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I love the cap that you made to curve over the ball. Is it going to
Yeah.
rest in a holder of some kind? Or is it going to be able to wobble around?
It'll be
Meaning
flat.
it's flattened on the bottom?
Yeah, it's flat on the bottom.
Cool.
So
That's
that's,
beautiful.
thank you. I have
And
a
you're doing a
series
series
going.
of them?
Yeah.
Nice. Are you going to
Yeah,
sell
because I
them
asked for help
individually?
last time.
Yeah, yeah. They no, you've made such huge progress on it. That's fantastic. It looks truly sculptural now.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of having a set of them. Are they going to be different heights and angled different
Yeah,
ways
I'm
and so
sort
on?
of playing around with the different heights and
Nice.
mhm.
Are
That's
you
it
going to sell them only as a set or are you going to sell them individually too?
individually,
Yeah,
individually.
cool.
So
And that remind us is brass that you're working in mostly?
brass. Yeah.
Cool.
I got a bunch of a scrap brass that I'm just playing around um, with the actual texturing, and then I'm still praying, practicing the riveting. It's not perfect, but I
Yeah.
gotta be okay with not perfect.
I
I'm
like
not
that
you,
you the two
Rachel.
you guys see me fail all the time. I am far from
Ah,
perfect, but I like that you went with the tube rivet. I think that pass through adds a lot to it. Are you pleased with the final look you got?
yeah, yeah.
Nice,
I
nice.
am. I am.
And remind me, did you make a die for cutting out your people things, the figurines?
Yeah. Uh-huh. I did
Cool.
a hydraulic pancake thing
Yeah, pancake die,
from
nice.
Potter. From
Yep,
Potter. So I mean, the thing about it is like this gets stuck.
yep.
So technically I should be making it simpler, the shape. But it works, you know, and it
Yeah.
helps from having to saw it. And then I can just focus on the series and how I want to play around with them. Because I also want, like you suggested before, maybe add some gems, you know,
Yeah.
here and there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
You also could do a whole lot with patina on
yeah.
those and get
Mhm.
some color variation in there. And if you mix up your metals even more, nickel, you could do nickel silver, you could do copper, you could do half and half, so they can flip it so that one side is copper and one side is brass, for example. Or, but yeah, the patinas that you could get away with and make some really neat, that would be
Yeah,
fabulous to
I
see.
have nickel, but I didn't think nickel was good to use. So I have a whole couple sheets that I am not touching. I heard it wasn't good
There you go.
to
So it's not good for jewelry because a lot of people are allergic,
oh,
but for sculpture, it's perfect.
okay.
Right? It's softer than the brass, so it's going to be easier for you to punch.
Mm-hmm.
I'd
Mm-hmm.
I'd give it a shot if you have some sheet lying around.
I do.
Yeah.
And then I also did some of that. Ooh, will you make it into a screw? Tap and die?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
bought the set and I'm practicing with that. I finally got the idea.
Cool.
Yeah, that's
With
about it.
that, that's definitely that you want the harder metals for that if you're going to really be screwing and unscrewing. If you're only screwing it together once, you don't you can make them out of silver and so on. But yeah, the threading can get really jammed up if it's in a softer metal. But it's fun once you get the power to do it. And did you remember that you can make a screw out of tubing as well as out of rod? So you can
Yeah.
nest your screws that way. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I
Can't wait
think
to
I
see
have
what
to
you do.
invest like thick wall. I think is what you said. Thick wall tubing. I have to get
Yep.
some of that. But right now
And
I just
nested if you're going to do. Yeah.
practice with putting it through metal for now.
Very cool.
Yeah, I
Very
was
cool.
happy. I had to ask my neighbor, and then after a while, I figured it out. It was
Yeah.
more like the drill, the the metal, and the gauge. It was a lot of
Hmm.
calculation trying to figure it out, and then numbering it all so that you use the right one with the right one.
The other
But I,
things that'll help it go smoothly is making sure that you use some kind of lubricant as you're doing the screwing in and screwing out, just like you would if you were drilling something. And I find that sometimes it's easier to clamp the handle piece into my vise and do the other part into the handle instead of trying to keep the handle level. You know, it's designed with that rotating handle that you hold on. So sometimes I do mine upside down to give myself a little bit better force downward. Um, but yeah, there's so much possibility that it opens up once you start making your own mechanisms.
but I
So
haven't seen you use that or do that though.
I don't have a lot because I don't do a lot of cold findings. I'm doing so much soldering work. I used to do a lot more. What I do use it for is very specific projects where I'm trying to get either a kind of mechanism to close a device or if I'm trying to create parts that can be separated from one another. So one of the biggest things I did was for one of the Halstead jewelry design competitions, and I made a series of little houses that could open up that are all connected together into one big row house of pieces, but you could also wear each one as a separate pin. And so those screwed together and unscrewed. So yeah. Uh, I have it upstairs if you drop me an email reminder. Oops, you're on mute, so all of a sudden. Um, but if you send me a reminder, I will bring it to the next session. It's
Oh, that would be
somewhere up
fun.
in my
That would be great to see
house
that
somewhere.
because sounds
Okay,
amazing.
sure. Yeah,
You have to
it
pin
was an
yourself
interesting class.
now.
I have to pin myself now. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else have anything? Hey, Wendy, welcome, welcome. Anybody got any projects that they're stuck on? Nothing? Okay. You're just all here for the hinges. I know how it is. Let me spotlight myself. Okay, before we get to the hinges, you can tell I'm procrastinating a ton on the hinges, can't you? Before we get to that, I was going to show you a little bit about what I have been off doing because I got to take a workshop with the amazing Ann Wolf, who does some incredible Mokume Gane. And so I was up in Seattle at Danica Studios, which is a lovely space if you ever get the chance to take classes up there. And we were doing chisel patterning of Mokume Gane, which you put into a pitch and carve away at with, you're tapping at it with chisels of varying shapes and sizes, and you are doing that with a chasing hammer. So it's just tap, 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 working towards yourself, usually in a big pitch bowl. This is what's left of the second big piece that I did. So 3x3. The middle circle became this, which I'm super stoked by. This is a silver and copper Mokume Gane. So it started life as a 3x3 billet of 27 layers of material. Let me see if I can zoom in for you guys.
Wow. You mean you soldered 27 layers?
No, the class we were doing was the patterning. There, I have taken classes and have welded. It's fusing. That it's not soldering the layers
Okay.
together, but they get fused together with a lot of pressure and heat, so the metals sort of marry together on their own. That's a whole different class. She does teach a class on that as well. I took my workshop on that with Jim Binion and Chris Plouffe, who are two of the masters in the field. But I would absolutely because there's always more to learn. But once you have your thick billet of metal and forged out to a fairly thick size, I think this started life as a 14 gauge, then you have to put the patterns down. And there's a couple different ways to do that. One of which is using burrs and so on and carving into it. And another is punching up from, my hands are not in view, but you punch up from behind with various tools, and it puts dents in the material, and then you file down the tops off of it. And this is a third technique that I find I like even better than those two, in which you're able to really control your pattern. There's photos of the steps that I went through up on Instagram on my probably up on my Facebook too. But so it's carving down, and then you have to forge it out again. So you're forging flat all of the layers that you've carved through. And once you've done that, then you anneal the heck out of it and rolling mill it until it's back to flat surface. And then in this case, what we did was we cut out a 3-inch diameter circle and used a deep draw press for our hydraulic press, which is literally just a steel rod that you progressively get smaller and smaller, or larger and larger with, excuse me, smaller and smaller with, pushing it down into a steel container. And so this is for sake cups, but mine's going to eventually become the bottom of a box of some kind. And so the flat patterning sort of, by the time I was done, it actually looked a little bit like a mandala, which was not at all what I was aiming for. But what it did was exactly what I'd hoped it would do, is it centered my design on the base and then branched its way up. So these are all carvings, and the layers create the ripple effect because you can see how many layers it's gone through. You're cutting through about 5 to 7 layers when you carve it out of the, in this case, 27 layers. So you don't have to use it for that. You all have seen my Mokume work on other things, but I was interested in seeing the deep draw process, and deeply disappointed that I cannot afford by any stretch of the imagination the equipment that is used to do it. But I've made one, and I don't need to make more from this particular style. You could also forge it out and, hand build there are several amazing Mokume artists that do that. If you haven't seen David Wong's work, his little vessels that he hand forges up and chases and repousses, they're worth looking at. That was about a week's worth of work. We also learned about some interesting patinas, and she talked a lot about how to solder Mokume. In Mokume in particular, because you've melded the metals together, you need to work with medium solder or below, which those of you that have taken my hollow forms class know that means some challenges for your order of operations, right? Because you got to make sure that you're not overheating the Mokume, or else the materials start to melt back together. Um, and then I made some other pieces, some other patterns as well, and those are on their way to becoming a couple of necklaces that I'll show when they're done. And otherwise, I've been trying.
Such a nice job. Wow, you did a great job.
Thanks.
I took
It
it
was a
with,
lot of fun.
yeah, I took it with her in January and mine didn't even come close to what yours looks like. So good job.
Well, to be fair, I've had other techniques classes in Mokume. So if that was your first experience with Mokume, don't fret. And also know that I went in not caring whether I got to the end of the project. I was there to learn a technique and to see if I could do what I thought I wanted to do with it. So I was I spent 3 days doing my chiseling, and then rushed to make the container on the second to last day. So it was an exercise in, I think I know X when I do this new technique, and what I know, will it behave the way I expect it to? So for me, it was a big success because of the fact that I was able to get the pattern to do pretty much what I anticipated along the way. But it's one of those things that I know I will be making a lot more of my own pattern work. And I'm thinking I'm talking at you with my face, and I'm talking at you with my empty bench. I know that one of the things is that with Phil Baldwin having passed away, he's the gentleman who did a lot of the major patterning that you would see at Reactive Metals, that you'd see at Rio Grande, and so on. I'm going to be making more of my own. I wanted to anyhow. I just haven't had the time, and the drilling method, the burr method, is very, very messy and takes a lot more time overall and doesn't get as interesting a set of patterns, frankly. And this is more my style. I can play around with patterns, this chisel work. So I know that I've always wanted to be able to say, yes, I did my own patterning as part of my bigger projects, while still acknowledging fully that I won't make all the Mokume that I'm going to use for sure.
Well, I think that's half the battle, is to
yeah,
figure and foresee how that pattern is going to come out. Yeah, that's a big chunk. You did such a nice job.
Thank you. You guys might be interested in what I did in preparation for this class, which is not something that she asked us to do, but it's something that I needed to get my brain around some of the what ifs. I went into, show you what I got on the bench. I went into a graphics program, in this case Canva, and started making and pulling some patterns that I thought were Mokume-like, so that I could talk to her about about what tools would be best for it. Because my thought was, well, I'm going to learn this chisel technique, and I know that in some cases the chisels will work better than others, but in some of these patterns, I may actually want to stick with the more standard ways of punching or using burrs. And so I went through with her and said, I think this is how I would approach this. What do you think? And she very kindly listened to me ramble for a little while. This was the pattern that I used for my very first piece, and it helped me understand straight line work very well. I didn't do the crossover detailing. I just did the diamonds. And I'm very excited about how that one came out, and will probably repeat it now that I know what I'm doing. But it was good to go in, and there was a bunch that I realized, nope, no way, not gonna make that pattern. So, you know, this is never going to be something I'm going to carve out of Mokume. It's too intricate. And it was just very helpful to sort of see the possibilities. Oops, these are my small versions of them. I think I got them all mixed up. It gave me, one, it built up my excitement for the workshop. And two, it gave me a sense of a reality check of what would and wouldn't work. And it also made me realize that the chisels we used were sort of medium sized for what I want. So I'm going to have to make my own smaller chisels if I want to do some of the more delicate patterning that I'm interested in accomplishing. So this is something that would come out as a fairly standard swirl. And then all of these graphical ones, which the geometrics really appeal to me, like this is going to be way too crazy once you get it in with all the lines. So that one's out. But these swirl patterns would be really interesting. These would become very, very linear, and you just have to be careful to roll it out equally in both directions. So it was a fun exercise, and it led me up to some strong successes in the class. And I can't remember if I have the pattern. Oh, I think it was the pattern that I ended up doing the cup from was that one that had the arches in it. Where did I put it? So this was my question to her, is how would I make that happen? And what it turned out was I was thinking about the negative space wrong. I was thinking I had to carve all the white pieces, but no, she said, well, as soon as you make those line cuts to create the uprights, then what's left is going to be the silver or copper, whatever your top metal is. And the gouges that you make on the black lines are what will create the pattern. And I had realized in practicing the straight lines that in order to make this actually not just become a whole slew of lines together, I needed to add the arches in it. So I took this and converted it into that starting in the middle, working my way out series of shapes like this. And they got a little bigger on my billet as I drew them. But most of what you're seeing here is how much more the material stretches at the top of the cup than down at the bottom. So the pattern gets much, much bigger and longer and drawn out. And these were curved when I first put them down. So I learned a lot about how much the metal is going to move as you do it. So lots of great brain power stuff and a really useful skill. So if you get the chance, take a class with Anne if you're interested in Mokume Gane. And she's a really generous teacher and a lovely human being. And she's based out of California, so she teaches there a lot. But also right now she's teaching up in Alaska. And she said she's going to try and do a West Coast tour and maybe hit Portland and go from there. Questions on any of the Mokume stuff?
Yeah, I was wondering, you have the pattern, you put the pattern on the piece of metal, and then you take a drill bit and you just kind of follow the pattern, drilling it in?
No, it's chisels. In this case, the one option is to use burrs, but in this case, we were using out, so you can see what they look like.
Oh, like
See how
engraving
close I can
chisels.
zoom in. They're itty bitty little chisels. Let me see if I can get in really
Okay.
close.
Okay. Did you use it without an end? A ball or anything?
Yeah, because you're tapping the other end. It's
Okay.
hitting it with a chasing hammer. So it's
Oh,
this
wow.
teeny little sharp bit right here
Mm-hmm.
that is doing all the work. Or in this case, I used the curved one a lot too to get around the
Okay.
arches that I wanted.
Hmm.
You can
Interesting.
absolutely do it with a whole series of ball burrs and other, and I've seen people use separating discs and so on, but it takes a lot longer and is a lot harder to control, and you get very limited patterns, whereas you draw with the chisels.
Could you
Mhm.
use
So
could you use gravers?
ostensibly you could, but you got to dig through doing a lot of surface work, and so it might be as a touch-up tool, but these go a lot deeper than that.
And
And I say that, go ahead.
she makes the gravers, and her gravers are different than the gravers that you normally would see, like from Victoria. And I just wanted to interject too that her classes are online, so you don't have to go.
Oh, yep. Yeah, she does do virtual classes.
Yeah,
You'd need to buy
kit.
if you're doing just the patterning class, you need to buy the material, and making your own billets without being in person is a really challenging thing. It's really a
Yeah, but she
two-person
usually
job.
has the billets.
Yeah. When
Yeah.
she's doing the patterning classes. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
absolutely, you could take her patterning class online, and she has pre-recorded video clips that she talks over live to show you all the steps, so you get a really good close-up view. So yeah, I can highly recommend it. And if you're on the East Coast, Eric Burris teaches different styles of Mokume from what she does. both in the method for making the billets, which are the stacks of metal, and in the way he grinds. He does the mostly burrs methods and burrs and filing methods of patterning. And there's a lot of nuance to it, and it's the kind of skill that I would, just like with stone setting or hinge making, I would take from as many people as I could to get everybody's special take on how they go about it. It's not a cheap skill to learn, both in terms of the knowledge expense and in terms of the materials. I don't know in fact, I'm not sure I've ever taken a class that cost me more in terms of all the materials that I bought around it. There are others where I bought more tools, but yeah. So take a look and see if you like it and play around if you're interested. And it may be for you, it may not. It takes a lot of time, is what I'll say.
And what is Anne's last name again?
Wolf,
Okay.
like howling wolf, ANNEWOLF. And I think she's based out of Santa Barbara, San Diego,
San
somewhere
Diego.
down there. San Diego, yeah. And she does have small, like 3-person classes at her own studio. If you have a group of people that want to study it and it doesn't otherwise fit your schedule, she will occasionally bring a class to her studio and teach in person there. But you got to have the whole crew, and so she doesn't have to do all the marketing and everything. So yeah, it's back to teaching. I'd recommend taking stuff with him too. He is a font of about metal. He's a modern day metallurgist, and I would say he's also an alchemist and a whole bunch of other things. And he's the one who is taking Phil's place in making the base billets for reactive metals and so on. So they're going to be more expensive than they were. They're going to be fewer patterns, if any. You may end up having to pattern your own all the time if you want to work with Mokume. So, any other questions before we go to hinges? Okay. No more procrastinating for me. All right, let me catch you up on what I have done while we were
tried.
away. Pardon?
I tried.
Tried to help me procrastinate?
Yeah.
Oh. Did I miss a clue to procrastinate further? No, I'm actually pretty excited to get these going. So besides the other work that I've been doing, what I did in preparation for this is I finally got to my edge cleanup on everything, made sure that I have enough spacers, enough layout that I think it's going to actually be a full-size necklace. And I cut a bajillion hinge knuckles of 2 different sizes. I realized that I'd been limiting myself by the size of this closed, all the way closed thing, and I was trying to make it work. But in truth, I needed a little bit shorter than that. So what I did was I put a little piece of sheet metal at the back plate, and that gave me that dimensions less material. So I've got my middle knuckles a little bit narrower than my outer 2 knuckles. Which is okay because they get the middle knuckle gets stabilized and locked in by the other 2. And I did the exterior sanding, and I want to thank you, Wendy, for the toothpick idea. That was brilliant, and I went a step further. I'm going to show you guys what I was doing to clean these up. So Wendy had suggested, because I was having a hard time figuring out how to hold them, suggested putting them on a toothpick, which I did, and then I made the mistake of trying to sand them or with devices while holding them out, and they go flying. So what I did was I ended up sticking them in a partially drilled hole, and I can turn them and use a sanding something against them. You guys can't actually see that. So I can sand up against it. And in this case, I was using a split ring mandrel and just burring up against it. But by doing that, the action was pushing it further up the toothpick. I keep putting my hand in my way. The action of brushing against it was pushing it further up the toothpick and not letting it go flying off the end. So that was a really good addition to the cleanup process, making it far less painful than it was. The other thing that I've done is I've filed in a little notch on all of my corner pieces where they're going to rest. And I did it by first doing a triangle file, or sorry, first doing a flat file to get myself a little surface area, and then doing a triangle file, and then moving on to the round file coming from both sides to make sure it's nice and even. And on all of the little guys, I was able to just do the whole height of it because that's what my hinge should be. I had to do a partial on this one because my hinge is only going to come part way up the big piece when it connects to that. So today we're going to focus on putting together as many as my hands will manage, all the upright hinges. As a reminder, we're doing this direction for all of our corner meets, right? Every one of my 2 points coming together is going to be upright, and every one of my in-between flats is going to be this way. Anybody remember why?
Because of the way you want the hinge to move.
Yeah, I need directionality so that when it gets up over a shoulder, it's going to have some bend this way, right? It's going to have to fold over the shoulder. And depending on the size of the person it's on, it needs to open this way. And I decided design-wise that I would rather have these stay together than do the flappy wing thing. So I could have done it either direction, although it'd be a little harder to put this direction hinges on a corner. So one issue is by putting my hinge stacked in the corner, that's a lot easier to solder together. It would have to be much smaller and awkward. So that helps with this direction. And then the cornering gives me the expand and contract without breaking my design flow. Right? So I've thought about both things. In other big necklaces, you may find me doing a whole bunch of one direction up to where the shoulder should be, and only then do I hinge over. Like, for example, on the other piece, oh, I dropped all my little hinge parts from the other one. On this piece that I brought out last time that I've been working on, all of these are the base, the left-right hinges, and I've stopped where I need to start doing this direction hinges. So the next one up, instead of doing this, is going to do that, right? So it's not that I have to have them all alternating. It's that I've chosen to, for the integrity of the piece, combined with the function of the hinges. So with that in mind, let's take a set and go do some soldering. So I'm going to use my handy dandy toothpick so I don't lose them. I'm going to pull out 2 of my bigger hinge pieces, and 1 of my little guys. In fact, because I'm a little bit suspicious, I'm going to pull an extra of each one in case they melt. If you don't pull over your extras, they're guaranteed to melt. And if you do, hopefully they don't. It's a jinx thing. And I want you guys to tell me, am I still coming in clearly no matter where I'm going in the studio? Is it the same level of volume?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Good.
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully the mic is not jacked up this time, and I apologize for the recording quality on last session. I think it's either the other mic that I have is dying or one of its cables is, and I'm sort of inclined to say it might be the latter, but I haven't had a chance to do enough testing with it. So I'm just keeping these off here, my extras. I'll put them out of the way so I don't accidentally melt them. This is my set. And as I started to talk through last time, there's a whole lot of variability on how you can work with your hinges. People like to put graphite through them. People like to solder them as whole tubes, but cut away the piece that's missing. You do want to generally work on a fairly flat surface. I tend to be a little bit more of a wild card kind of gal, and I set myself up in an offset stack. And I am making sure that I put flux on all the pieces. So by offset stack, I mean I'm resting one out, and then that's going to be on the other side. And I'm stacking my 2 that are going to be near each other, right on top of each other. It does take a little bit of checking your precision, but let me see if you guys can you see how I've set the middle one off from the other
No.
two?
Can't see.
Can't see. Oop, too much zoom.
Oh,
Let's see. Nope. Sorry, guys. This one doesn't want to position very well.
Or just move
So
the brick. There you go.
that help putting something behind it.
Yeah. Your
So you
hand.
see how I've offset the middle one?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's going to be bumped up against this other side, which I'm going to put a little flux on so it doesn't get lost. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to manage to solder all three of them at once. All this middle one is doing at this point is acting as an offset to make sure that my top and bottom ones are far enough apart. Right? So it's really a placeholder. Like when you put one of those little plastic things between your tiles while you're setting tiles, if you've ever done that. So my goal on this pass, if I can get my pieces straightened up, is to solder my top and bottom knuckles onto this piece here. I do this with picks because I'm trying to get the very barest amount attached. Get a clean pick though. This may require getting a new pick out. Let's see what I've got that's cleaner than that. Ugh, those are all
So
awful.
Rachel, the middle supporting piece is not going to be soldered because it's not fluxed, or?
No, it's not going to be soldered because I'm going to be very careful about where I put my solder, which is
Okay.
on the upper outside and lower backside of it. I'm not going to get soldered near it. This is why I say I go a little bit on the wild side. You could absolutely dip your middle pieces in a whiteout or another material as a stopper, yellow ochre if you prefer. I utterly abhor the cleanup from either of those. So my personal approach is to try and do this and just be really careful about it. Now, if you're working on something less consequential than hollow forms, and by consequential, I mean like less bulky, you may want to go down to a tiny tip instead of using the one. I'm using the one because the hollow form is going to steal a lot of my heat. And because I'm at the corner in particular, that's where two chunks of silver meet. So it is going to want to get hot slower than all of the rest of the surface. So I really want to make sure I'm blasting the area. But this is one of those things that I say, try a few different tool combinations and ways to practice. I mean, ways to approach it. Got to actually have some solder available. And I'm using small amounts of solder. Whoops. Let's get that plastic off of there. So I want the tiniest possible amount of solder on my pick.
And that's medium.
This is a medium, yeah, because I've already got a whole lot going on with these hollow forms. Come on, a little bit more than that. There we go. And I want to make sure that my material gets up to heat enough that when I touch it down, my solder is going to actually stick, if I can get there. And if I can, I'm going to set up both pieces because the less time that I need to be on my piece overall, the better. Come on. Ugh, my piece is very dirty. Put a little more flux down because that is so grubby. So things that I recommend if you do not want to try the Wild West method include, instead of doing 3 pieces of our tubing here, you could do one whole piece of tubing that is the full length of your hinge, and you cut the about a third of the middle knuckle away off. Hang on a sec, I got to not talk because I'm moving too much. There we go. Not enough flow. So my top solder flowed the wrong place, so I got to get a little bit more on there. Come on. Boy. Yeah, my solder flowed all the heck and gone all over the place. So I did solder. Oh, maybe I didn't. It just got clung together. I think those will come apart. Bear with me a sec. Yep, there's one. So one of the challenges with these two big hollow forms next to each other is that it wants to create a little tunnel of heat. And it's trying to sort of bundle all the heat right in the middle. Which is why I pulled that back once I started to get flow problems, because I was getting very, very hot. Another option to do this is to set it up in like upright and work on it with putting down the individual knuckles as you go.
Rachel, any chance you could move it in screen?
Oh,
There.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I
that's
forgot I was super zoomed in.
perfect. Thank you.
Yep, except it keeps dropping down. Bear with me a sec. How's that?
Great.
Good. Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. So you could also work, you could put the hollow form up in oops, except I managed to knock things while I was spinning. You can put your hollow forms up in a set of cross-locking tweezers and touch your pieces down, get solder on your tubes and touch your pieces down. But you run the risk of hang on a sec. Oop, it flowed together.
Oh.
Yep, this is why we bring extras.
You're
I
getting
need a
ready to
flatter surface. My brick is really grubby right now.
Mhm.
Put my solder bit over there so that I don't waste it. And I think I'm gonna, on this particular one, I'm gonna start by putting my base hinge knuckle down separate from the others to give me a little bit less trouble as I get the second piece in place. So I'm just trying to get it hot enough on the hollow form. My knuckle is really wanting to heat up a lot before the other piece, so I'm going to try and get a little heat in there and then reposition. There we go. So what I had to do for that was get my solder to stick to my knuckle, and then as it was flowing, I pushed it into place to get it there. Not ideal, and not necessarily the way you're going to want to do it, because you may need more control than I've got in that. Now I'm going to again stack my second one up. to give myself the spacer. Come on. Stack up for me. But again, it's still offset. I don't want it soldering to its mate. And I need to get myself another big hinge because I gave myself 2 extras. That was the problem. I didn't give myself a whole set of extras. Let me bring the whole bundle of extras over. And then I'm going to put my top one on and keep it in tucked. And I'm going to actually, because I've gotten so grubby there, I'm going to actually get some of my solder onto the knuckle before I put it in place so I don't have to get so intense with the heat. Come on. Just getting that up. There we go. That's flowed enough. So I've got my little bit of solder on the end. Now I'm going to place it on top of my spacer, making sure that I'm still lined up with the one below, because it's easy to put them on cattywampus. Come on. And this is the challenge that I'm running into is keeping them lined up, which is one of the reasons that people will run the pencil lead down the middle. Go. Okay. So we've got now our top and bottom lined up there, and they're spaced by the amount I need them to. Now I have a little bit of leeway. Come on, little guy. To do it this way if I want. I just got to make sure I've got the right facing. No, we can't do it that way on this one because it's going to be on a walker. Is it? There we go. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah, it's too rocky. So we're going to do this. So this time I'm going to put a little bit of solder on this guy, a little flux and a little solder on this guy. And then I'm going to pause and put it back between the 2 pieces. Right? And then that'll give me my height when I set this in place that I'm going to solder to. Okay. A little bit of solder. Make sure my solder is facing the way it should, which is towards the other piece. And I can keep it a little further out because these 2 guys have already been set in place. And because it's round and a hinge knuckle, all I have to do is line it up with my solder spot. I don't have to have these straight across when I'm just attaching the interim knuckle, the in-between knuckle. Solder in there. And I'm trying to avoid heating the other side because it is all easy solder. I mean, excuse me, medium solder, which means it'll want to flow again. Make sure that's level. There we go. So we've now got
Nice job.
both hinges. So again, I want to talk because I do this a way that would make other jewelers scream. I want to talk through some of your options again. you can take it, you should get lots and lots of rods of pencil lead, and you can thread them through it, right? That'll keep them all lined up. And the nice thing about pencil lead, I'm going to go over to my bench and draw this one for you, because this is a useful trick. I'm just too impatient to do it. I prefer spending my time with the frustration of positioning and occasionally melting out. So if you have, let's take that stack that we just were working on, where we had them ever so slightly offset, right? And you can run a whole bunch of lead right down the combination here, right? Just keep those positioned. And then you can run a whole bunch of lead inside these, outside of this second one, which will keep this from banging up against the piece that we're attaching it to, right? It keeps it offset. And this one stays offset to that side, but still stays in line with the others, right? So that's if your hinge is of a size that you can shove some pencil lead in there. It's a great way to do it. It supports it nicely. So that's option one. Option two is we could have been working on one of these in a, I'll go grab one, in a cross-lock tweezers. So I could position it that way, and maybe I'll do one this way because this is something that I sometimes do. And we can have our knuckles in a set of tweezers. I would probably not use cross-locking tweezers for those. I would probably use my lightest pair of steel tweezers that are under my control, because I don't want to overheat the delicate knuckle. Have a little solder on it and position it. The problem is getting to your accuracy on separated apart enough on when you do it that way, right? Because that's counting on you to touch them down. Another option is we cut our tube. In this case, I could have cut the whole tube for the full length of it. And then I cut away, let me draw this for you. So let's say my hinge is this long, right? I'm gonna, not before I cut off I have to have bigger tubing. I can show this to you at scale. Where's my large tube? Let's pretend I'm making a ginormous hinge, right? These are the tubes that I cut for our first iteration of what we were going to do. They were going to go between the Alex style hinges. So I could build this piece of tubing. This is my total length of hinge. And I can come in and cut away my middle knuckle part way through the tube. Like that. Can you see how much I've marked off in blue? Oh, this is not showing very well in this light. Yeah, let me draw this on the board.
Would you
So
cut
what
it
I've done
all
is
the
I've
way
got
through? All the way through?
no.
part.
That's the whole thing on this particular method of approaching it is the most solidly you're going to get it where you want it to go of all the techniques I'm talking about. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting away that
Okay.
and leaving this.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So this is the total length of my hinge. And this here is what my middle knuckle is going to become.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Except what I'm doing is I'm soldering it down to whatever I'm soldering it to. And I'm soldering here and here and stopping. I now have definitively.
Wouldn't it be the other way around, Rachel?
No, if this is what I'm soldering it to, you want the empty space where the third knuckle goes. Right? Because what we're trying to do is get our solder here and here, but not have anything in between. And then we cut this away and it's scrap.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So yeah, this is a cool technique. It just, again, takes a lot of patience. And you end up with this, and it also wastes a chunk of tubing, which ain't cheap these days. Right? So we're giving up the knuckles worth of tubing in order to be rock solid. You will get your positions exactly as you need them to be. right? And then you come in and you cut to size another piece of tubing, and it's gonna be just like that offset I did. Your last piece of tubing, you know these are rock solid, so you're just gonna set up your other knuckle going to the other side with just enough between the two pieces that it stays where you want it to go.
I
Right?
would think,
If you guys want me to demo that one, I can. These are such small hinges that it's going to be really, really hard to see. But I can do one using this process if that's useful to you all.
Well,
I mean, I can
I've seen
visualize
it,
it
Rachel,
based
I've
on what
seen,
you just did. I'm sorry, go ahead.
go ahead, Carmen.
No, I was just saying that, I mean, I can see it by you drawing it the way you did, and I don't quite understand, other than wasting the tube, why you wouldn't do that, because that's so many steps more.
So it is and it isn't. For me, I tend to be a little bit more go with the flow on what I'm putting together, and I like to do last minute touch-ups. But no, this is the healthiest of the ways that I've described to you for success. It's just, and if you think about it, if you're working in gold, unless you're smelting your own back, that's a like $10 or $15 piece of tubing that you've just wasted in
Okay.
gold. And these days it's probably a dollar piece of silver tubing in heavy wall tubing. But yeah, this is the way to go. And then the only thing that becomes trickier is that you then have to make sure you're precisely cutting your middle knuckles, which you can, again, if you've got the proportions coming off of your tube cutting jig or something, you can do that pretty steadily, because we want these to be a close fit no matter what we do. Worst case is you make these a little oversized, your middle knuckle, you make them a little oversized, and then you file down to fit. It's a little harder if you're on a curved surface and things like that. Wendy, what were you asking or saying?
Well, I was always shown that you cut from the top down. I think I like your technique better. It looks easier.
If you cut from the top down, then you have knuckle material left in the way. It's blocking like you have to grind it out somehow.
Right. But
So,
it's not soldered in. You only put your solder on the left and right knuckle.
right. To me, the only real benefit of doing this model is that you don't risk that extra solder flow. Right? I'm
Yeah.
never going to have a piece of tubing near that wall. So the idea of leaving material there doesn't cut it for me.
Yeah.
Now, what you may also be remembering is there's there's a situation where you would create a cradle for your piece, and that gets soldered in, right?
Yeah.
And so that's putting a nesting tubing inside that the hinge sits inside of. Do I have an example? I think I may have one of my bracelets that does that. Let me double check. Does this one do that? Yes, this does actually do that.
So where would you put the pencil?
The pencil lead on this one?
Yeah.
Let me get a third color. Oops, that's not a Sharpie. I mean, that's not a marker for the thing. So in this one, you don't really need to put pencil lead in because we've done that double tube thing, so they line up themselves. But if you wanted to make sure you were really placed where you thought you were, I would probably, after I've got these soldered on, I'd probably run them here.
Okay.
Because that just enough to make sure that I don't by accident shift this knuckle as I'm soldering it in place.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I honestly, on this version of it, you probably don't need it, because if you've done a good job of soldering these down, this is going to hold itself because you've got it tucked. If it's too loose that it moves around, your knuckle is too small, right? These should be a tight fit.
Yeah.
So I personally would not bother using the pencil lead with that version. I know I look like I've built like space engines here for you, but let me talk for a second more about that cradle hinge. I got to zoom in for you guys a little bit. So this is a cradle hinge on this. And it's where if in the case of this particular piece, I didn't have a good surface to hold the hinge knuckles. So you build a cradle that it fits into. So you can see there's about a third of a tube, about a third of a tube that it rests inside of. And then my knuckles have a neat, they can't go anywhere but in that other piece of tubing channel that they run down. See how that works, gang?
Mm-hmm.
And you can see there, that's when it's closed to, or as open as it gets, it acts as like a stopper. And here it doesn't go far enough to close again because it's already closing with the material inside. But that is a great support system if you have this weird hanging out in space thing that you don't have enough material to connect to. You can build your own connector.
And that's
that-
in
And it's
my
kind of-
box of unfinished things.
Oh, yeah? Oh, did you take this class with John?
No, I took it with Leslie Kell, Villarreal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's neat. It's one of those things that I never think about when I'm designing, and I should, because it's an elegant solution. It's good for really elegant boxes, but it's often more than you need for jewelry, unless you're working really, really big, because it just adds bulk. So yeah. So do you need me to demo any of the other specific versions? You want to see me working upright in the piece and doing a touchdown? Or do you want to see the cutaway version? The problem is this is so small. I don't know that you're going to see much if I do it.
I think I'd
I can
rather
also
see the
promise-
upright.
This one? Okay.
Yeah.
I can think about that. You guys know I use hinges a lot. So I can also think of a project down the road that uses a larger version of this, of the cutaway, so we can really watch it. And maybe I've got a bunch of boxes that are in my unfinished pile. Maybe I'll do a box lid hinge for you guys.
Yeah,
So that you can
that
get
would
a
be
sense
cool.
of how it works in that. Okay, but if I'm going to do the upright, I need to get the right pair. So let me make sure that I am connecting the correct ones. Bear with me. Okay, so we just did this set, this little guy. And that's going to need some pickling to get rid of the extra flux. That's going to go to this. So we're now working with, got the right set? Yes. Okay, so this pair, and that's good because I have a corrective action from my bad hinge last time. So we'll take those over to the bench. Is the camera feeling a little blurry to you guys? This feels like I'm so close that it's blurring a bit. Should I zoom out? I'm going to have to hold the piece in place for you guys, aren't I? Or else you're not going to see it.
Well, the
see.
block itself is a little blurry. But that's
Yeah, there we go. That's a little clearer. Okay. All right. So, when I'm doing it this way, I'm going to put my outside two knuckles on first. And one of the downsides of this technique is that it's counting on me figuring out how much space I need between them. And I'm going to be wrong. So I'm going to err on the side of caution. Now, thankfully, my knuckles collectively are too big for the width of this piece. I've been counting on filing away the outside bits. So what I mean by that is it's going to hang off a little bit off each end. So as long as I do a little careful hang off the end action, I should be okay. And so I'm going to be doing these one at a time. And I'm going to be fluxing, putting a little solder on it, and then holding it in tweezers. And when this is to heat, with the point which I put the solder on, I'm going to be touching it down and having it flow and letting it go. So you have to be in a place where they're not going to roll off on their own, thus the channel we built in. But you'll see it's going to be very hard for me to measure where I should be positioning them, which means I may end up having to do a little more filing than I would on my other techniques where I've got the stacker. Because the stacker, having that middle knuckle helps me position my layout. So ultimately, that's what I'm doing is solder on the knuckle, touchdown. And why am I doing it that way? Because I want a minimal amount of solder flowing. If I were soldering something else to this, I might put my solder on here and get it to flow because it's my hardest to heat thing, right? It has the most mass. But in this case, I need the control to be so that I don't flow solder everywhere as I touch the knuckle down. No matter which of the techniques I've talked about, your goal is low amount of solder, the bare minimum that gets you a really, really solid seal between the piece and the knuckles. You can't skimp on it, but at the same time, you can't do so much that it flows the next time you put heat to the piece. And yes, I have had my knuckles soldered together on the occasion that I am like trying to put in a pin and I want to ball it up. I have done that at the last hour, as you're trying to get the final thing put together. It's really frustrating. I'm still using my medium solder and I'm still not using much. Oops, that's my gummed up pick. I want my clean pick. Wouldn't be a bad call to have a completely clean pick before you start doing. I'm going to scrap that one because I managed to get my solder inside the tube. So hang on a sec. Grab another one. This is why we make lots and lots of extra knuckles. That's a small knuckle. I want a tall knuckle.
So Rachel, I see that you fluxed all the way across that hollow form.
I did.
Doesn't that make you risk the solder flowing across rather than just in those two spots?
So this is an area, a topic that I find has a let me bring that question back up when I don't have the tiny pieces in my hands and I'll talk through that. There's a lot to be said on that topic, but not with steady hands. Come on, there we go. Okay, so I've got a little bit of solder on what is now the bottom of my tube, and I'm keeping it out where it'll stay warm but not get superheated. I don't want to see any color on this yet. And I'm trying to get heat up on my position for where I'm going to land it, being very conscious of knowing where my solder is. And then I got to position it, but I don't want to be so hot that I don't have room to move it around because I'm not going to get it right on first positioning. And I need the flux to kind of catch it. And you'll see that I'm doing a lot of flicking on this. I know that I need flow, but I want to have it as soon as the flow happens. I want it out of the way. And I don't want to overheat my tubing, which is a really easy thing to do. The tubing is the weak spot on this puppy. There we go. What I'm looking for is a little bit of flow underneath my tubing. Ideally, I can see it from both sides, but I'm in a little bit of a tricky position here, and it shouldn't be able to move out. Then I'm going to grab my other one. That is a messy tube. Let's get that one. Again, there's flux on the tube. There's flux on my base. I just need my solder to be on one point of the tube, and I need to know where that point is so it can face downward. Let me get a better grip. I need new tweezers. These are awful. The points are dying on me, and I haven't been able to grind them well. Okay, so the second one is even harder to position because you need it to line up and you need it over far enough that you have room. Actually, fell into the channel quite nicely. If it'll just do its thing and flow, we'll be all set. On almost. There we go. You got to make sure that you're watching this one because I knew it was a little offset, but I also knew I had a channel that lined up. So when that flowed, it settled in, and I just need to make sure that it hasn't twisted as it flowed. That'll happen a lot with this. So now we can see how well I did for inserting one of the small knuckles in terms of spacing. My little guys. Am I going to have to file away? I'm going to have to file a little bit away. Do I have a shorter knuckle? I do. Whoop. Wherever that one flew to, it's almost going to fit. There it is. I'm going to use the Woozy tweezers for flux. So this one will fit once there's not flux in the way. I don't know if you guys can see it. It may be too tiny and interfered with by the tweezers. Can you guys see that this is fitting? It keeps falling out, but my little itty bitty knuckle will slide between. It's probably going to need a little cleanup if that's not flux at the front edge. Come on, stay in position for me. So in this style of approach, there we go. That shows it nicely. So this style of working, I'm going to have a lot more cleanup to make my knuckle fit because I'm eyeballing it basically, right? Whereas the version that I showed you first, they're stacked and I have a spacer that I know is going to be my opposite knuckle. So whatever I design it to, it's got to fit, right? This one, I have to either have really, really good precision with my lining up and know my spacing well, or I end up having to file down either the insides of the outer knuckles or a specific middle knuckle for it. But that's not too bad. I was pretty close to my measurements, and that's once the flux is out of the way, that'll be a snug fit. So now I need to get the other half of it, and this way I've got my stabilizers on this piece. At this point, it's going to be a lot easier to work sideways with the last one than to position it, except I forgot I have to take this one off because it got lined up badly. Oh, that was it. I realized that I had put I was putting my base knuckles down instead of my middle knuckles that I wanted to. So let's peel this guy off, which should be relatively straightforward. Now, I do need to be cognizant of the fact that there's some solder in there. So I think what I'm going to actually do is wait a minute and cool this down and do a little sanding and filing to get that cleaned up again, because I always want to know that I'm in control of the solder. And we're going to end up putting this one right about there, but we got to line it up to make sure that we're in the right spot. Questions about that approach to knuckles? And you can see I could work upright if I'm doing that cutaway, like if I was doing that technique where my knuckle was the half knuckle. The only difference would be that this piece would have some tubing connecting sort of a bridge across here and here. This would still be empty down in the middle. Nice. Is that showing on screen for you guys? Any questions?
So the one next to it is the one that's going to be attached that way.
Yep.
When
No,
you link
yeah,
it,
this
when you
is
link
this
it.
corner is going to get a single knuckle that fits right there.
Yeah.
So this. right? We're going to put the knuckle in that goes there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This is actually a good opportunity to note a couple things. You'll see that there's a tiny height differential,
Oh,
right? That's okay by me because I'm making fairly generic hinges and I'm gonna file down the outer edges to the outside walls of whatever I've got for the shorter layer. And then the hinge pin will come up above and be decorative. The eye won't even notice that I've got two different heights between those two, one because it's got such a rough surface to the other piece. So it was how the reticulation crumbles, I guess, is hopefully not crumbling, but it's just a much thicker piece of reticulation silver here, making up the difference.
So Rachel, you were gonna comment, I mean, I made the, that you
Yes.
had done the flux all the way across, but as you kind of answered my question by soldering each one of those individually. I thought you were gonna solder them both together. So if you had put
No.
two of the tubes on, I couldn't figure out why you would put flux in the middle because the solder would flow into the middle maybe.
So I have a slightly different take on flux than a lot of people do. There's a whole lot of people who teach that solder flows where flux is. And that is not how I was taught. Solder flows where heat is greatest, whether there is flux there or not. Now, there are some exceptions to that. You can absolutely solder things without flux at all. What flux's main purpose is to keep the oxidation down long enough for you to get the fusion of metal to metal, whether it's solder to solder, whether it's two pieces of material together, whatever. So I would describe it more as encouraging good flow. I know people who flux their entire piece. Like I grew up with a teacher who insisted that you dunked the entire thing. And that was flux, not the borax thing. Like I get it when you're doing a full borax alcohol dip, which is in and of itself a type of flux process. It's intent in that case. You guys know what I'm talking about with the alcohol borax combo?
Yes.
yes.
Anybody not? You need a description? Okay. So if you're doing the reason to do borax alcohol flux, which by the way, if you are doing that, should be a double dip after cooling between dips so you don't light your pot on fire. What you're doing there is you're giving the alcohol is burning off, leaving the borax, which is a protective coating fire scale from occurring to a point, and nothing is going to stop it if you go too hot, right? If you keep your torch on. But that action, which you coat it, you burn it off, you cool it, you coat it, you burn it off the second time. The first one is to get rid of any grease and things like that that are on the piece that would keep the borax from coating it properly. The second is to do a full coating of it, because that second burn off is what's going to leave you with that beautiful husk of the white borax powder, okay? And that too will eventually burn off. Fluxes are variations of that kind of a tool. John has a really astute observation that blew my mind about this. We are trying to remove the oxygen from the equation when we do something like that. Liquid anything that we put on it has water in it. And what is water made out of? But it's got some oxygen in it. So there's a battle going on as you burn off that flux that sometimes he believes you should never coat something in full flux. He does, like when he's working on his object wear, he was absolutely doing a full borax dunk in many cases. But if you use a flux, which is water-based, you're both fighting the fire scale and the oxygenation and you're adding to it. That battle, like we're trying to find the sweet spot. And in the case of the paste flux that I love so much, it gives you indicators. It goes to the white crispy as it burns off the water. and then it goes from the white crispy to that either red or clear glassy look. And that is what's happening as the temp gets to the right stage for your solder to flow. And I think that point is why some people think of flux is the place where the solder flows. It's not quite. It's flux indicates here there be a safe space that is low oxygen and low blackening and low carbon layer, and therefore it is a good spot for solder to be able to make the connection. So when you ask me whether I would have it flow in both places, the answer is not just about the flux, but it's also how much solder, how much heat, right? So you saw me, I was coming at that heat on that hinge stuff from the corners, from the outside corners. I wasn't doing I'm heating top down. It wasn't doing I'm heating that middle section. So what kept my solder from flowing was a tiny amount of solder. I can always add more later, right? So that's the number one cause of my solder goes where I don't want. I put a puddle. Number two is heat control. I am heating. The only time I came around to the other side of each of those knuckles was after it already started to flow. So just like when you're watching a bezel do its thing and you see I call it the sunrise effect of that line of the solder flowing, same deal when you're working on hinges or anything tiny that you're soldering together. You look for the area of least risk and you heat that section to get it flowing. And as soon as it flows, you do the quick pass to say, here's the heat, and it follows the heat. It doesn't follow the flux. It follows your changing of the temperature of the metal. It goes, here, come here with me as I heat around this spot. So to take apart, if you guys go back and watch that little stretch of video, maybe you'll be able to understand that context with what I actually did. Because when I'm doing it, I do it by instinct at this point, and it's one of those things that you get when your brain makes the connection to flow. So watch your own soldering almost as if you're standing outside of yourself the next time, and think about, am I starting at that point of least resistance? And maybe even film yourself so you can see what your actions are. But if you were to that we just did over again, you would see I'm working outside, sudden flow, and I couldn't even, it's so quick that it really was just a pass to get it back over under the knuckle. And as soon as I saw it gleam under the inside of the knuckle, I stopped in that heat area. There was flux there. It wasn't going any further because of the flux, but it would have if I'd kept the heat.
So how do you know where the place of least resistance is?
Well, give me some ideas about the things that you think impact the heat change on any piece of metal that you're working on.
The connection.
How they connect together. Yep. So any point at which they're connected, what is happening when I have two pieces connecting? What is it about that position that makes it rough? It's that there's more mass, right? So the bulk of my mass is right where those two meet. So that's harder to get up to heat. What's another thing? Let's talk about a bezel wall against a bezel plate. What is one of the common things that makes a difference between the temperatures on the bottom plate versus the upright?
The size or weight.
The thickness, yeah, the gauge of the material, right? Again, that turns out to be about mass. There's more mass of the metal on the back plate usually, and it can get it's hard to get up to temp. Another thing is that if I've got a brick below it, my brick is taking some of that heat, or you'll hear me talk about that pool cue bounce if you're doing it right. And it's one of the reasons we do that lift up and go under thing, is it brings the heavy back plate up to temp without risking the upper. As soon as if I'm just resting on a brick, I've got a risk factor of my upright. It's more likely to get heat. Another factor is, let's say I'm working on a bezel and it's a little round bezel. I make a little oven by having walls all around it. Just like if you're in a room with a lot of windows and the heat is reflecting in, as soon as we're heating anything in the middle of upright walls, heat, big risk, right? Other factors, where's my solder seam? Whenever possible, put your heat action as far away from your solder seam as possible, because your weakest point is if you reflow that solder that you've got, right? So these are all like, there's a million factors that influence that. In the case of a hollow form, I have this particular hollow form, my heaviest density of metal is right at the corner that I'm putting this on. We're going to have a different heat point when we work on the sidewall ones, because they're along the wall, which is only one thickness thick, whereas my corners is the meeting of two bends of metal. So it's harder to heat this corner than it will be to heat my wall. Right? So I don't have a simple answer for you, but those are the factors that when you look at it, and just put your solder project on your bench as you're about to go solder, take a breath and look at it. Think about the components of it. And then say, well, if I heat here, I'm going to be blasting the far side, which has a delicate element that's weak. Or if I heat from up top, it's one of the earliest exercises I teach in my intro classes, which I haven't taught in forever. When you're making your own bezel, I do a lot about why we leave the extra plate outside of the material, even if we're going to be cutting it away, and why you need less and less as you get more experience, but you should start with a good amount of material, because it takes a while to get used to heating the inside, the outside, and skipping the wall, which is our weak spot, right? And then I talk about that pool angle, and that's how we work the weakness. So if I'm soldering a plate down, I mean a wall down to a back plate, my angle is coming in here as soon as I start flow. So I'm heating from up above, I'm heating around from up above. As soon as I see the first flow, or I might tilt it a little bit to encourage that first flow, then I pop out and I'm going right at a 45 with my torch to that position, because then I'm equally heating my metal all along, and I won't get it to flow up, I won't get it to flow out, right? I get it to flow around. That was a lot of ramble from what about the flux?
That was great. Thank you. Get you thinking.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I was like, I gotta listen to this again.
Yeah, this is a lot. And what I'm trying to do is articulate for you the things that 20 plus years of experience of soldering has gotten to me. I did not do that level of processing about my work. A lot of it is instinct built on, ooh, I burned myself, or I flowed the wrong place, or I melted the knuckle, right? And you ask me to do the same thing for working in gold. I'm nowhere near what I do with silver in gold. I melt things all the time. I melt walls because it has a different set of properties. And therefore, my brain still wants to think, how does silver react? And gold reacts completely differently. Use different torch tips. Your heat does not travel. So it's not like with silver, we want to heat more of our mass. With gold, we do not. You also want a narrow heat focus so that you're really working in and out very quickly. But a lot of those flick techniques that you're seeing me do so that I don't melt the tubing, those are gold techniques. There's a lot more heat and move, heat and move, heat and move, because your target area is much smaller with gold. And the weird thing for me is that people who grow up learning gold first think gold is super easy and can't handle silver. And I'm the exact opposite, because I started in silver. So, okay, pause there. We're going to take a look at getting our second hinge on, because I needed to file some down. Any other questions while I check these for readiness?
I find that I use my flux as an indicator of ready to be for solder to flow.
Good.
So, does that make sense?
That's exactly what it should be doing. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's, once you start heating and it bubbles and then it freezes, and then when it starts to clear, and before it evaporates is when my solder is going to flow.
Exactly as you should be. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I like the flux paste with a watered down paste rather than the green glowy stuff. I can't stand the green glowy. The really viscous green
like
liquid.
the patterns.
The batterns, yeah. Although that's supposed to be better for gold. So I use it for that on occasion if I'm doing gold to gold. If I'm doing silver, gold to silver, I still use my paste flux usually. But yeah, that is part of the purpose. And I think you guys have seen me do hollow form construction where I point out that I also use the flux to give me a marker on my back plate when I'm putting down the final stage of when I'm putting the final closing element on my hollow form, the flux as an added bonus. I can get it to that white crispy state, move my oh, I'm sorry, I'm out of frame. Move my object out of the way, put my solder down, and put the object back in place on the marks that have been created. So I'm a huge fan of flux as an indicator, but you don't have to use it in order to get solder. It'll be much harder on you if you don't use it because it does deoxidize, right? It is keeping your metal clean. And so if you don't come up to heat quickly, you're not going to get anywhere. And that's, I think, why a lot of people teach that the only way to get your solder to flow is to have the flux in play.
You know what I had happen? I was soldering one of my pieces and I've
Yeah.
been using the nickels, like you said, the nickels.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the nickels soldered onto it. Which was weird.
Oh, you're
'cause
working
it
with
hasn't
brass.
happened. Pardon?
You're working with brass. You're working with brass when you do it, or was it your silver that soldered to your
No,
nickel?
it was brass.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I probably should have warned you about that. I think nickel and brass have diffusion bonding properties because they have material in common. So the nickels trick is for gold and silver. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
And it should work with copper too. So that does not surprise me, and I apologize.
Because I was like, what happened? This has never happened to me.
Yeah, so go to titanium for your brass. Man,
Yeah,
I
I
didn't
have
even think about that because I so loathe working in brass that I avoid even talking about the brass activities. I'm so
Uh-huh.
sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Um,
Because it's never happened to me, but then, I do have titanium strips, but I like the height that the nickels
yeah,
give.
I wonder if there are other materials that would successfully, like you might be able to get steel washers. That might be an acceptable alternative, but what the term you're looking for, I think it's called galvanic or galvanic fusion. And you'll probably find Jim Binion's name all over it because he's a guy who thinks about those kind of things. But there are certain materials that are more inclined to be happy together. And sometimes that works to our advantage and other times not so much. So the only thing I'm trying to be careful of is that I have in the past accidentally squished my knuckles on the other side. So I'm just trying to be a little cautious about it. But we now have a decent connection point that this will go into. So I can hop back over. And again, this second stage on this one, there's not really a healthy way unless you're really good at marking out your dimensions to do this last knuckle in the clamps. But again, if you're really set on it, just mark for yourself where you're going to position it on the piece and put it down and just know that you may not be quite where you thought you were. So I'm gonna line them up, and this is all nice and cool right now because I haven't been working at it. I'm gonna grab one of my middle knuckles. I had one that was a perfect middle knuckle for this, right? Yep, there we go. Because it's all cool, I can just position it. And it's again a little bit offset so that it won't accidentally get soldered to the other piece. I really need a clean brick for this because this is a very lumpy brick I'm working with. Get myself positioned. Something making this, my other knuckles are interfering, so I need to make them hang off the edge because they are a little too overhung. I was like, that was way farther down than I expected it to be. And I want to make sure that it's a little lifted up in the back. just so that leveled out a little. This is one of the reasons that I tend to do these sort of the wild method, is because it gives me a little more freedom to adjust to the wildness of my own piece. You know, I have a lot of this free form work that I do. If I were doing hinges on a precision locket for Sotheby's, I mean for Tiffany's or something, I would probably worry a lot more about the precision of my hinge approach. Okay, so again, I'm being conscious of the where is my heat risk, and this little cave makes it more risky than this other side, which has a little bit better bounce, but I still need to get my heat in this heavy duty area over here, not just on the knuckle, but between the knuckle and the larger piece, ideally without overheating here. So my angle is focusing on this far corner of this piece. And also remembering that I have reticulation silver up there, which is pretty wussy in and of itself. And so it's a risk that it might melt out. Ooh, don't know what that was. Did I burst? I don't think I have a hole missing on this one. Ah, well, here's a fun exercise, gang. I think I managed to solder over my air release hole. Did I? Ah, some solder flowed out, or some metal flowed um out of the piece and covered over my hole. So that may have been a little bit of a burst of my hollow form. Yeah. Oh, bad. Okay, we're gonna let this cool and we're gonna do some repair work. That's a good lesson without me being damaged by the lesson. So you see how there's a little puff in the back? Can you guys see that? It's curved
Where?
now.
Oh, okay.
On the back of this piece, you see that little tiny bit of, oops, sorry, the little
Yeah.
tiny bit of curve.
Yes.
It puffed up on me. So, and then the spot that got covered over, I think this was my hole. This is a challenge when you're working with reticulation silver, is it's got a layer of much lower melt temp material inside of it by the time you're done, because all the fine silver has raised up. So this, I think, basically just while it heated, it was such a small hole that it got superheated inside, flowed down and blocked the hole. And that pop we heard, if you heard, I don't know if you got it on mic or not, but there was a pop that was
No, we
thankfully
heard it.
not a
Heard it.
gunshot level. Pardon?
I heard it.
Asking, you heard it? Yeah. So that was, I think it was popping in that, which means there's probably a hole somewhere else, but we're going to let this cool completely. And this is the most fortunate of blasts. When a hollow form closes up like that, if you're reheating, anytime after that initial closure, if you close it off completely and then do nothing heat-wise with it, you're okay. But in this case, it filled in and we were heating it, so it exploded basically. And this was a very mild explosion. I've had them blast open a hole. Ostensibly, it could fling pieces in bad ways at you. So I feel pretty fortunate that we didn't have worse. I'm going to let that cool completely, which is going to take a minute or two.
I
This is
just
still
thought it
in
was
good
your
shape.
air hose popping.
No. Yeah. And yeah. So that was fun. So what are we going to talk about while we wait for that to cool? I'm going to recover from that by drilling a hole once it's cool. A bigger hole than we had, apparently. And then I should be able to, the reason I'm pleased with how it blew out is that I should be able to recover from it by tapping down the back plate a bit and flattening it again. But that's a little bit of excitement that I wasn't counting on tonight.
Yeah, so
good lesson.
The air hole got covered with the soldered and the knuckle, and that's why
It looks like it's not the solder. It looks like it's like, you know, like peanut butter and jelly, when you squeeze the sandwich, the jelly oozes out the edge. It looks like because I've been grinding down my edges, this is supposition at this point, just looking at it, gang. My top layer, which is the reticulation silver, I ground past the silver line and it became a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And as it heated, it blurbed some of the middle metal. And I'll see if I can, once it's cool, I'll draw around where it blurbed out. And it looks like it literally just dripped down and blocked the air hole that I had.
Okay,
A weird combination of things to happen, but
yeah.
it happens, right? And I was also working with fairly small air holes because I wanted them not visible as much in this piece.
Mhm.
So yeah, at that combination, and then because I kept heating, it started to do this. If I had gone further, it would have actually probably
Bloated.
blown open for us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
a little bit of
that was
extra excitement.
great. That was great that did not happen, because I know that's how
Yes.
it is for balls, right? Like when you're making like hollow balls and all of that, you have to make
Yep.
sure that there's a little air hole, and yeah.
Anything hollow, it's a good idea. So the danger thing that I teach when I'm talking about hollow forms is, yes, you could make something that is completely closed, but you get one attempt to do that
Mm,
and you cannot touch it with heat again. So, for example, you could make a ball with the hole, and then your last solder exercise could be to put a little piece of stock metal in there and solder it closed.
mm,
But when I say no heat, I mean I've had hollow forms burst on me when they were on a hot plate and I was putting kyumbu down. Like, it doesn't take a lot of heat, because what's
mm,
happening, the burst is because your oxygen molecules that are trapped inside of the hollow form, they're perfectly happy when you're in temperatures that are normal. As soon as you heat them, they expand, right? And so what you're doing by putting anything above everyday temperatures on it is you're causing, it's the same reason jars and cans in your cupboard can pop if you get too much growth and bacteria. You know, it's literally expanding the molecules in there, and it gets
Like
to a point where
botulism.
yeah, botulism is a good example of what would cause a burst. Or it, even more fun than that is if you've ever had a can of soda or a beer can burst, the hops and it goes overboard when you're making your beer and it goes, right? It's the same effect. It's the expansion of whatever is trapped inside that's causing it. And we previously had a little air hole that the molecules could scoot out of when they were getting too crowded. And when it closed over, that's what we got. So it's not just anything that you enclose in metal and overheat.
So when
In
you
fact, I
heard that
suspect
pop, you immediately stopped?
I didn't immediately stop because
Yeah.
it was such a chill out pop that I thought, like you did, I thought maybe I got something caught in
And the-
um in my um not the hose, but in the fixture of
Yeah.
the torch. And it was only when I saw that it was behaving oddly and lifting that I stopped. So that I would say that was my hindbrain reacting. So I stopped a couple seconds later than I should have, because something wasn't right, but I didn't know what.
mhm.
So yeah, try to not put unopened objects on your heat. Try to leave yourself a form. It's one of the reasons that I encourage, when you're doing your first hollow forms, put your drill hole or two, depending on two makes it easier to get the acids out of it, but put it somewhere that you know you're going to put a bale over it, but it's not like nobody's going to go looking inside the bale and go, oh, hey, there's the hole, right?
Yeah.
Or hide it where you're gonna put a hinge. Like a perfect spot in our 3-knuckle hinge is where the third knuckle would be, right? We got a hinge on either side and we got a hole, and it's gonna be covered up by the other knuckle, but it's not gonna be closed when we're heating it. So give it some thought. Let's see how that's doing for cooling. Yeah, that's a consequential curve we got here. That is no small thing. Let me zoom in for you guys. Where am I? There we go. So there's a good little bubble there.
Wow.
And then, yeah, and then where's the spot? So this, you see that blob?
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
hole, my protection hole was there, and this all globbed out from the edge, I think, because it's a lump now. And I
Boy,
can
it
see
looks
sort of
like
the
you
effect.
domed the piece.
It kind of does look like I domed the piece.
Yeah.
So we're going to pop on a drill bit and release the pressure. Let's see, do I want to put it back in the same spot or do I want to put it elsewhere? I think I'm going to put it just off to the side of where it was.
Move your camera over.
When I was,
Sorry, I got to zoom out, don't I?
Okay.
When you were
When I was
taking,
when I was taking metals classes when I was in college, someone took off the torch tip and put it on, but didn't tighten it. And then
Yeah.
another person turned on the torch, and then all this flame started to come out because it wasn't attached tight.
Mm-hmm.
That woman threw that torch up and ran out of
Oh,
the room.
no. Yeah, people react to that sort of thing. Whereas John described instances while he was teaching college that he'd have to carry an acetylene torch that was still on fire with its tubing outside calmly when students would burn through the tubing. They would, if they were next to each other, they would burn through each other's tubings every couple semesters.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And so he has had occasions where he would literally have to calmly pick up the tank and the tubing that was on fire and walk it outside. Like, okay, that's what you got to do. So I need to take down some of the squishy material so it doesn't flow back into the hole I've just created. And then we're going to take care of that dome that we added in. So I'm just going to grind. And that what I can see is that I probably had some spot elsewhere that blew out. No, maybe not. Maybe it just got a little too hot overall. It's one of the fun parts about working with reticulation silver, but look at how much wobble it has down on the bottom, right? So that I'm going to take care of with a little hammer, little mallet. We're going to flatten that baby back out.
Where's your dome? Is it on the top or on the bottom?
It's what I'm hammering. It was on
Okay.
this was the domed side, so I'm just stuffing it back in. Much better. Back to healthy. All right, let's go back to the brick and not do that again.
Got a little reticulation going on.
Pardon?
You have a little reticulation going on?
Yeah, so it's reticulation silver on the top, and that's what caused the peanut butter jelly factor. Is it oozed out, probably because I've been grinding down to that level. All right, we're gonna get a boatload of flux tucked in here. See if we can make another connection. Everything else is still in play in that I've got my solder in place. Oh, now you know what? I'm gonna not have so much. May have been doming before I got to this stage. And I just didn't realize it. There we go. That's a good level. So I've got the tiniest little bit of solder over on my outside knuckle or my middle knuckle, trying to get this connected. And at this point, I only care to get at least a tack solder. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of melt out from my reticulation silver right now. So I just need to get enough to tack solder it. This might be a situation where I would consider using an easy solder just to get a tack, and then I'd come back in with a little medium. I feel like I'm very close. There we go. Okay, so you notice I'm just moving the knuckle not all the way out. I just need to stabilize it still while I get the last of the solder, but I had it tacked in place enough that I could move it out a smidge. And I want to, again, make sure that I've got the flow all the way through. I think we're good. Okay, so that is hinge number 2 of the 735 hinges we got to do. And it too looks like it's going to be a decent fit. May need a little cleaning up in the pickle, but we've got hinge action. And so this is going to be one of our this way hinges. So that's a couple different ways that you can approach hinge positioning. Doesn't change much when I'm doing the left-right, as long as I'm working to my flat surface. Meaning if this were a very tall piece and I wanted my tiny hinge just exactly in the middle, I would probably be doing that in the tweezer action so that I have my channel upright and I get everything positioned where I want it, and gravity is helping keep it in place in the channel that I've ground. That was a lot of words. If that didn't make sense, I can draw what I mean on that one. Where's my drawing board? There we go. So if I were working on a very, very large piece, say a box, and I needed my hinge to be right here down the middle of a very large piece, so it's not resting on my block as I do it, and my hinge is going to run like this, or God forbid it actually be like 7 or 9 piece hinge. Remember, we want always odd. We always want this and this to match. 1, 2, 3, oops. I'm gonna make one more knuckle. So let's say I'm doing something like that. I will have ground down just like I did on my pieces, on these corners, on these ends here, right? I've ground down a little channel. I will have ground that down consistently, more consistently than my drawing apparently, all the way in, so that my knuckles won't roll off and they'll stay where I want them to be. And it has to be a wide enough channel that the knuckles all fit into it. And it should not be more than halfway the height of the tubing. It should be somewhat less than halfway. If you are trying to do a hidden hinge, you need to go right to that halfway mark, because then when you swing it closed, it'll be hidden, right? But we'll talk about that when we get to fancier hinges. So this is sort of like 1/4 to 1/3 deep at most, and it can be less. You really only need it enough for keeping things in place, unless you're doing it as an intentional design element. If you don't have hinges and lockets, the book Hinges and Lockets, it's a worthwhile one to keep on your shelf. It talks a lot about when you start to do, if this is my box and if my box is this, and this is my hinge that I'm insetting, it has some great material on how those all fit together and how you nest them. And this would be a great scenario for one of those cradles that we were talking about, right? And then it would be a cradle that's split down the middle inside of the box, basically. But for the sake of our soldering exercise, if you're doing this and it's something big like that, then you can actually, this would be, if you wanted to do the method where you cut away, you would cut away every other one. So I would cut on the base of this one, this one, this one, and this one. And these would all eventually get junked once I had my long tube in place. Or you could position them out and just do the alternate ones. It's just going to be a lot harder when we put the other side of the box in play, right? To get the other half positioned when you have multiples in there. So the techniques I've been using and the ones I've described but haven't demoed all can be used for just about any kind of knuckle hinge. It's the most basic concept of a hinge. And I would strongly encourage you all to go wandering your local mom and pop hardware store in the hinge section and look at some of the variations that there are available for hinges. Especially cool are the double swing hinges, which are kind of magic in my opinion, because there's components to the way a hinge works, and it includes, is there a stopper that keeps it from opening or closing too far, right? Is it a hinge that can go all the way around, or is it a hinge that can only go part way? And different styles of hinges have different purposes, even in your house. So look at them, you get to see a hinge up big scale and think about what's the context that you would use that equivalent in for jewelry. And if you're looking for a good thing to start making hinges on, make an object like two stones or an object piece of metal and another dangling stone, and just make the hinge that goes between them, because that is not a mission critical hinge, meaning it doesn't have to be exactly positioned in order for the hinge to function. All it is a movement pivot point. So you get your two knuckles on one piece and your one knuckle on the other, and then you run something through it, another tube or a piece of wire that you've balled up, or do a rivet, and you've got a good practice hinge without a lot of risk factor. Like these, if I get them wrong, my necklace won't move right. It won't position right. The knuckles will jam up. But on one
We
that's
don't see
just
you.
two pieces. Pardon?
We don't see you.
Oh, sorry. I'm waving my hands at you for this last 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Hi. All right. I'm doing all these hingy movements in front of
I'm
you. The
like-
neighbors are probably thinking I'm nuts. Okay, let me try that again. Design a piece that has an upper object and a lower object, and all you're doing is making the hinge connection that goes between them, which doesn't have anything, it doesn't, because it's not part of the action of the piece other than a little bit of movement. It's a good practice piece for how do I connect two knuckles and make a tight knuckle in between, right? Because it's a very different fitting exercise than, say, the Alex hinge, the saddle hinge that we were playing with originally. And go to the hardware store and look for the actions of the hinges, because they're giant versions of what we will do for our own work. And if you see it in this scale, you'll go, oh, wait a minute, I understand now why this hinge only opens to the 45 degrees, or this hinge goes all the way forward and back. And then the double hung hinges are really cool, because it's one, if you've ever been like through a swinging doors, there's a couple different kinds. But certain swinging doors, not the style that you see in saloons so much, but there are others where the door can open and hinge that way, or it can open and hinge that way. And what it is a hinge that has 3 layers to it. So you've got knuckles on one side and knuckles on the other, and it only opens a piece at a time, right? Super cool concept. The kind of thing that you'd see in really interesting mechanical jewelry, but you can see it big scale at the hardware store. So I love mom and pop hardware stores. So much more interesting to browse through than the big box stores. There's a lot of that, and clasp mechanisms. If I haven't given you the rant about how many exciting clasp mechanisms you'll find in a really old, like if you can find a 50 years or older antique style, old school mom and pop hardware store on some side road in a tiny village, they're going to have 50-year-old clasp mechanisms and things that aren't produced these days, because we're not making that scale of small hardware as much as we used to. And it makes for some cool jewelry inspiration in terms of mechanisms you can add.
Yeah.
I got a lot of hinges to make, and I'm happy to make more of them in front of you, but I also feel like this is a pretty good representative sampling of the hinge manufacturing process that I have. I think 14 more to go.
Oh, wow. Do you ever go
On
crazy?
there's a reason that I do this over time. Normally I would, and it's also one that I'll warn you, much like sawing or soldering in general, there are good hinge days and bad hinge days. So when I have a good hinge day, I try to go and do as many of them as I can until I start melting things, and then take a breather and go come back to it another couple days later. Because as you saw from my first attempt, there are definitely days where you're going to be more stable with your positioning and have more torch control and have more connection to that flow point and where I was pointing my torch when. Because a lot of times when I'm tired, it's going to be that I'm holding the torch at a bad angle a lot, or I'm bouncing heat without thinking about it, any of those kinds of things. Anything I can answer about what we have done today or the state of the universe of metalworking or anything?
Well, thank you.
It was a
You
great
did a
day.
lot.
No accidents.
Good. Well, near misses. I like the near misses.
Yes.
A wrap up for you is that we will go back to our third Wednesdays starting in April and for the next few months. So we're going to be April 16th is our next visit. And I will try to make progress on this, but I have a couple other projects that take precedence. So I may not, but I don't know that I want to spend our next session doing hinges again, since you guys have seen that. Maybe what I'll do is try to get, before we come back to this project as a group, I may get us to the point of everything but attaching to the big mechanism, to the main clasp. Although that's just going to be 2 more hinges. There's nothing super exciting about it, other than that it's like, ta-da, we're done. So I asked you guys last time to think about, are there things that you would specifically like to see on an upcoming project? Otherwise, I'll go back into my box of overflowing things and pick some other stuff.
Rachel, whenever it happens, I'd be really interested in when the piece you've been working on tonight is all ready to come together, how you do your final cleanup.
Okay. I can hold off for that. I can tell you a lot of it is about using a tumbler as much as possible. And using rough textures that don't need a heck of a lot of finishing. But that's some of the other things that we're going to be doing to this. We were debating putting some tiny sapphires in tube set along a couple spots, but I want to see it together before I decide for sure about that.
And
so yeah, I'm happy.
You basically gonna use regular riveting to close your hinges?
No, I am likely to try for, yeah, that's something I should show you guys. I'm likely to do gold balls on the ends of silver rod. So that'll be a soldering exercise, which is a fun one because you can wreck your hinges if you flow too much solder down it. And I do not currently own a tiny torch. A tiny torch. So this will be done with acetylene.
Smith Little.
One tip. Yeah, I don't own a Smith Little, which is what I would normally put the ends on, that kind of thing. So it'll be with an acetylene air torch when we do that.
Ooh. Ooh.
Have you ever?
Okay, anything?
I just wondered because, I mean, I do have little Smiths, but one of the people I take classes for really likes the small handheld butane for stuff like that.
Not a chance for me. Not a chance for me. Nope.
I'm just thinking for that.
Not hot enough.
I mean, when
yeah, we've got a lot in the way with all the hollow forms on either side. So we've basically created a canyon of heat sink between each hinge in these large objects that we're putting together. It's actually easier to solder a top onto a peg than it is to try and ball it up.
Yes, and if you're going to use silver for the rivet itself, and then, I mean, this is what I would do if I was doing that. I would solder a ball to one end of that wire, correct?
Yep.
And then I would only have to be soldering it closed once.
Bingo. Yeah.
Okay.
And if you don't want to do that, so the other thing is not everybody wants a ball up against the skin. So you could also do a ball and then only rivet the back. It gets a little tricky getting materials to support all the activity of getting the rivet hammered out. But it's from the back, it's a slightly cleaner look. I just really like having the surprise element on the back. And I've got the scrap
What
gold.
carat gold are you thinking?
I use 18 karat for almost everything that I do. The only time I go higher is when I'm doing my weaving, and that's 22 karat because it's just a much more poppy look against the silver. But I cannot stand working with 14 karat. It looks like brass to me by the time it's done. So yeah, it's 18 karat,
Okay.
and I use the scrap from other projects to make the balls. And that's something we can show. I'm just doing it on a charcoal block. It's basically granulation that I'm doing, which goes really nicely with an 18 karat.
Great, I'd like
Yeah.
to see that.
Yeah. So there's a lot more. I mean, besides the hinges, there's a lot more between now and then. Some of, just so you guys know, as a preview, some of the finishing that I will use, the tools that I will use, the tumbler, I use a jewel tool for a lot of this final cleanup because it gets some really nice scratch reduction. I use the sanding discs, the Moore's sanding discs, and sanding on, sandpaper on a split ring mandrel. A lot of hand cleanup on the last little bits. And this one is going to be mostly satin finish because I'm going to do a little blackening in the reticulation, and all the textures come out better when you have that satin finish. So I'm not going for high polish.
So
My big regret. Yeah.
I just
Go
want to
ahead.
ask a question about order of operations. So
Mhm.
when you have gotten it to the point where all of the knuckles are on, are you
Yep.
going to do some pre-cleanup? Like, obviously after you've soldered everything, you'll be pickling everything. And then are you going to put everything into the tumbler? And then you can see, before it's all assembled, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
do whatever cleanup you need to do after, things come out and you can see what you've actually got before you then decide to start putting it together. That's
Yeah.
partly what I'm curious about with that big a piece. How do you approach cleaning it up?
Yeah, so the answer is a little of everything. There's a lot of pre-cleanup before I put it together. And I try to be in and out very quickly on the putting together between the pegs. What you'll discover is that I'll have it fairly clean before we peg anything. And then when I'm doing the pegging, I'm going to be trying for a very limited area of darkened metal. Like I want to do as little as possible to have to mess with it. And that's partially because of the peanut butter jelly thing we just saw. The less I heat my edges, the less, one of the problems when I'm working this way is that I get lines of coloration and solder marking whenever I put the torch to it again, right? So and because I like this ground texture, I have to be careful not to over grind it. So one of my final touch-ups will be wherever I've had some of that ooze or the line or the seam lining, I'm going to have to go and regrind a little bit, which gives it a nice quick touch-up to clear that out. But I'll have hinges in the way, so I can't easily do that everywhere. So it's a little bit of back and forth in the tools. And I'll do as much cleanup of back plates and things like that as I possibly can. I've already done, so one of the things I did between sessions was I jewel tooled because there's a whole lot of roughness to each corner when I've ground away my side material. So I had to take down some of these, burry edges, and the jewel tool does a great job of that. And what else? So also to the tumbler issue, one of the reasons that I keep them apart and clean them up as much as possible is because by the time this necklace is together, it will be too big for my tumbler. I don't have a giant barrel tumbler. I only have a standard size. And it won't fit in there. And I'm a little nervous that I would end up with pins inside of things that I wouldn't be able to get out.
Mhm.
That's what I was gonna
So yeah.
ask. What kind of tumbler are you using? Are you using pins or hone and highlight or?
Well, this one actually probably hone and highlight would be a good mid pass. I tend to rarely use hone and highlight as a final finishing state, but that's just a personal preference that it's not quite the satin finish that I like. What it does really, really nicely is take down the burrs and the bits and bobs, and I usually leave it in for several hours if I'm going to do that. If I have any really delicate patterning on it, I won't use hone and highlight because it's too aggressive for a delicate pattern. But it's a great middle, like get everything to a consistent feel. And then I would put it in my pin finisher. No, I wouldn't do pin finisher. I'd do my steel tumbler. And so I'm using a Lortone double barrel, 5 pounds for each kind of, I've got about 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds of steel shot in each barrel.
Yeah.
And I
My
just,
other question was, if that's oozing out with your PB&J, um, would you ever put yellow? I know you hate it, but the yellow ochre, or the white out, or some barrier so that wouldn't ooze out? Would it still
it
ooze
wouldn't
out?
stop the ooze. It would
Okay,
still ooze. It's
okay,
literally that the when you make the reticulation, it separates the copper and silver, so you get a surface of silver, which has a much higher melt temp than the middle core by the time it's done. So what's happening is my heating of this little oven that I've built, this hollow form oven, is the molecules are getting hot. It's pushing heat up to the top. There's no place for it to go. The weak spot is melt out the middle of the sandwich, right? Grilled cheese might be a better metaphor for it. You put solid blocks of cheese in between two pieces of bread. It's not the bread that's going to melt. It's the cheese that's oozing out from the middle of it. So yeah, I think yellow ochre would just make uh, cheesy yellow ochre. Like the yellow ochre would just flow with the cheese. It's not going to stop. It's not damming the edges. This
okay.
is really quite literally, it's got to be because I ground my edges down. Because otherwise I'd have a surface of silver or surrounding the material, right? Because as soon as you cut into a piece of reticulation silver, you're opening up the edge for the jelly for the cheese sandwich effect. When you make a whole piece of it, your whole piece has been edged in silver and topped and bottomed in silver. So I absolutely can see visually I'm 99% sure of the description I've given you guys of why it happened is I cut open my edge, I overheated, I didn't have a hole to begin with. It looks like, my hole was too small in this case probably, and it just said, "Oh, point of easiest drip out," and it's going to push its stuff out. I'm lucky it didn't go further than that.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So we haven't talked at all about that's all the steps that I'll be showing you guys as we progress through this. I just don't know if I'm going to get far enough before our April session to bring any of those to you, other than I'm still working on hinges. I'm still working on hinges. I got a few more hinges to go. So if we're doing something else for a session, are there any particular things that you are interested in it including, if I can? I'm not promising anything. But
Do
what are we
that
talking about?
double cradle hinge for me.
The double cradle hinge. Okay. I'll have to, yeah, I think that'll probably fit on one of the boxes I have. Let me see. Um, just put away a bunch of boxes that I didn't think I was going to get to for a while. So let's see what we've got for. That one's already far enough along that it's not going to get hinged. That one's far enough along. Yeah, I may have to make a box in order for us to do double cradle hinge. I'll see if, maybe this one will fit it. Yeah, I could probably manage on a double cradle is going to be a lot easier on a straight surface than not. So I'll keep this box aside and we'll plan on trying to put a cradle hinge in.
Wow.
Yeah, we can try
Wow.
that. It's been a
You
long
are
time.
you are the wizard.
Mhm.
It's been a long time since I've done that, but we'll see what we can get. We will succeed or fail together on that one. Because mostly I just want to get these silly little boxes finished. Anything else that people are looking for? Okay, well, give it thought, and if there's anything particular, I would really, really, really love it, guys, if I would start to see a little bit more of what's in your respective projects. I kind of feel like you guys are living vicariously through me instead of actually digging away at your own project files. I say, not trying to guilt you at all.
I'm hoping to
I've
get,
been sand casting, so I've been
Good.
melting. I've been like,
Okay,
I've been recycling my silver is
nice.
what I've been doing.
And
And
that's
practicing
awesome.
sand
So
casting.
my class
Cool.
today was powder coating, the advanced powder
Ooh.
coating one from Picosin. I just find it
Is that
interesting.
with Betty Barnett?
No,
Is that
it's for
who's teaching?
Bree Flora.
Cool. On steel or on something
No.
else?
On regular metals.
Ooh, neat.
Yeah,
Well, you'll have to show us some of your output from that.
I'm enjoying the class. Okay. I've got so
Okay.
many things lined up. I didn't need to
Nice.
take this, but I just found it so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Nancy, did you start to say something too?
I was just gonna say that I'm hoping I will get back into my shop soon. And I am, I'm gonna do a fold forming class, which I've done many times, but it
Nice.
taking class means dedicated time that nobody can bother me. So
Yeah.
we'll see what
Are
we
you taking one of Charles's or are you going somewhere else?
I've done Charles twice. I'm doing it with Nick Grant Barnes, who is a good
Oh,
friend,
cool.
and he's
Yeah.
also he just every year he wins one of the prizes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And Renee and Patricia, you got anything on the bench in the works? Anything? And Helen, I don't think I heard from you either.
It's Renee, and I have nothing on the bench, but I did find my torch because we had company. So say, thank God my friend came from California. So and it was right. If it had been a snake, it would have bit me.
Oh,
Yeah.
now, and did you find your box of things that you had packed too, or no?
I kind of know where they are now, but I
Good.
got to go in them.
Okay. There's your homework. Patricia, you got something?
I have, I moved last year and I'm finally starting to put my studio back together. It came at
Nice.
the end and I'm taking an enameling class in July, so I'm excited about that.
Who with?
It's at Mary Lee Ray's studio in Watsonville, and she has that woman from Texas, Jan Harrell
Cool.
is an enamelist.
So it's not Mary Lee teaching it, it's somebody
No,
else.
no, but it's going to be at her studio. So
That's still okay. You get to bathe in the wonderfulness of her work.
That's right. That's right. Mary Lee, I've taken quite a few classes from her, but she's got her health has been so bad that it's hard for her to carry a full class. So she's been asking guest instructors to come in and but that's fun too, because we get to see Mary Lee and then we get to learn something
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
I'm a little jealous. Is it a specific technique that you're learning?
It's not cloisonne. Jan Harrell does more different kinds of sifting and she just has little techniques with, different materials and stuff. So I can't exactly remember what it was, but I've seen lots of her videos and I thought it would be fun. So
Awesome.
yeah.
And Helen, did you have something too?
No, and I'm just jealous listening to everybody. So
If you guys don't have studios, there's nothing like getting even if it's a 1-day or 2-day class under your belt in person to get you remotivated to get to the studio or to get your studio set up. Like it gets your brain just thinking differently to have somebody else leading you and giving yourself the freedom to try it. So, yeah, my only problem right now is I don't have enough time to keep making patterns from my Mokume Ganai stuff. Or enough money in the world to make the amount of Mokume that I want to make. All right, gang, it has been a lovely evening with you. I hope you all have a good time between now and April doing your thing. See me in Connecticut, see me in Massachusetts, see me in Portland in person. It'd be great to meet y'all in person. So
I have a quick
I don't
question.
Yeah.
Do you give certificates when you sell your pieces that
I
you're the
don't.
maker?
I don't.
Because
Has somebody been
I was
asking you
just
for that?
no, I was just wondering because you put so much time and energy and the quality and all of that. I was just wondering if you would do that.
If somebody asked me for one, I would make one up, but it's not something that anybody's ever approached me for. Kind of
Okay.
only worth the paper they're written on, really. It's still gonna, if somebody wants to get an evaluation, it's gonna be an appraiser, and I'm not, at this point, I'm not famous, so nobody's going after my work as a like professional collector. I have people who are collectors. Anybody who has purchased 3 or more of my pieces, I consider to be a collector.
Yes.
So it's not something I've thought of doing, and I'm atrocious at doing my mark. I finally got smart and stamped a bunch of discs so that whenever I forget to put it on with a stamp, I can at least solder on a stamp.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm terrible about, like, I should be putting all the silver and gold markings on it and everything, and it's a good thing I'm a jewelry country or make it past the assayists or whatever they call them that do the approval of your piece.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's not something I think much about because I feel like I'm making like I'm not making precious things. I don't mean that they're not precious, but I mean that I'm not giving them a valuation. It's whatever you value it at for being the wearer of my work. You
Mhm.
like it, it's pretty on you, you feel happy wearing it. That's as much certification as it needs. And it maybe I don't I don't have that kind of like gimme value thing.
Well,
But also,
because your
maybe
work is
maybe
not
I'll
mass
regret not
produced.
handing them out. Pardon?
Yeah, because I was just thinking about that because all the time and energy you put in the design and absolutely everything you do when you're creating your pieces, they're works of art to me. I don't see
Yeah.
them as mass production, you know, so many jewelers that are casting and fasting and, I don't see that. I see them as one of a kind type pieces that
I sort of give them out there to the world and they are what they are for the people that are wearing them.
Mhm.
Um, it's an interesting question. I've never even thought about it. Thing to have a little, like, if I were doing something like that from a business perspective, I would put a little story behind why this piece was one to give that much. Like, I don't do a lot of art that is with a specific purpose or motif in mind. I'm not trying to convey something with my pieces, which is taught in art school. Like, I didn't go to art school and I'm not taught that style, and I
Okay.
just do it more gutturally, I guess. It's just I'm building what appeals to me and what my hands want to make. So I don't have a story for each piece. I on my very big pieces, they get a name, and it's usually something in a foreign language that is about a creature or a plant or something that inspired some of the shapes in it. Um,
Mhm.
if the piece is named, I felt it was one of my top works, is what it comes down
Mhm.
to.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm tired. I'm
Mhm.
saying things that maybe tomorrow I'll wake up and go, I should do certificates.
Yes. Yes. You should. Carmen told me to.
Right. All
All
right, gang.
right.
Oops, did I miss you, Deirdre? I didn't see you on there before. Did you come in time and I just didn't see you because I wasn't scrolled far enough? Do you have anything you're working on? No? Okay. Well, oh, I will see you guys next month, and may you make great art between now and then.
All right.
Hope
Take
your
Have a good
care.
drawings
one.
are great.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.